Welcome to another DNA Co webinar. If you're new here, my name's Justin, and I'm an in-house FGP for the DNA company. I apologize. I'm a little bit out of breath because I just had to carry my child up some stairs. So I am now in full webinar mode and good to go. And we have a really fascinating and nuanced topic tonight. I love this because the body has so many different built-in mechanisms for maintaining its own homeostasis. Right? We've got acid alkaline, we've got sympathetic, parasympathetic, etc. And among the most important of these balancing acts going on in the body is pro versus anti-inflammatory activity. We know that inflammation is one of the body's most important biological repair processes. It's your built-in natural response, right, to injury, to infection. There's a number of things that the body incites an immune response for as a short-term thing to kind of protect you from that. So when you have something threatening your tissues, your immune system mobilizes and it protects you, eliminates the cause, and starts the repair. But what I think is one of the more nuanced topics that people don't talk a lot about is redox, right? So we have this thing called oxidation and reduction that takes place in the cells. And you can actually have too much of either or. Right? Too much oxidation can cause inflammation. Too much reduction can also cause inflammation. So we want to make sure that we understand our genes as well as our epigenetic behaviors day by day to make sure that we're putting those cells in that state of homeostasis. That's where longevity truly lies. So here to discuss the topic with me is the great and powerful Dr. Krista Gosherman.
Oh, almost. So close. Bonjour, mes amis. There we go. Hey, Justin. It's good to see you, sir. How are you doing?
Good to see you. A little out of breath, as I mentioned, but here
Yeah,
on time and
yeah.
accounted for. If you guys get a chance, by the way, please fill out that poll because that helps us to
Mhm.
sort of direct our
Yeah.
conversation. And I love knowing what you guys are thinking and where you're at. It really helps a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really looking forward to this conversation this evening too, because I think, when this idea of inflammation, and more pointedly, especially within the supplement space, this idea of I can take supplements in order to reduce the oxidative load, which goes to the end of, can be reducing of inflammation. There was this incredible push, and to an extent, so many people pushed over the edge of where they should go. They were taking too many antioxidants to the end where our body needs some of that oxidative stress, some of that inflammatory stress, and they were offsetting that. They were putting an imbalance there. So I'm looking forward to this more nuanced conversation of what exactly is inflammation, how oxidation, antioxidation fits into that, and what you can play with both by understanding your genes and then your supplement regime, your health regime, in order to optimize that for you and your body. Yeah. And I can't think of anyone better to have the conversation with, good Justin. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very important one, and I think that right off the bat, before we dive into the poll, we should quickly kind of
Mhm.
distinguish what we're talking about as far as like
Mhm.
when you hear inflammation, right? It's one of
Yeah.
those words now where you just go, like it almost seems a
Yeah.
little bit like
Yeah.
visceral and scary to hear. But we need to remember that the body is massively intelligent, right? So when
Mhm.
we have a built-in mechanism, it is absolutely there for a reason. There's
Mhm.
such thing as acute inflammation, which is the only reason why you get any benefit from exercise. It's the only reason why your body is able to muster the response when you face a pathogen or something that's going to kind of tax the immune system. We want that natural pulse. We want the body to be inflamed for a certain period of time. What we don't want is chronic inflammation, right? When we have sort of genetic weak points and they're coupled with consistent exposures to things that activate that immune inflammatory response, the body will shift from acute to chronic. And that's where we run into our health problems.
Yeah.
But the solution is very individualized, right? I mean, we know
Mhm.
based on your genes and based on kind of the circumstances that are showing up, the same intervention is not going to do the same thing for you as it is for me and anybody else. So
Yeah.
this is a personalized approach that we push, and that's why we talk about genes and really getting specified about your interventions and what's going to work for you.
Yeah. And as well, I think that tipping point between the inflammations, because as more and more people learn about and become rightfully concerned with inflammation, there unfortunately becomes this idea that they don't want any. And we know that in certain instances, right, especially after exercise, after an illness, after an injury, that inflammation is life-giving. It is that initial step to the repair, to the healing. And without it, right, without supporting that inflammation, health points can go awry. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. So before we get too crazy, because I know Dr. K and I are itching to do exactly that, if Vanny in the background, the lovely Vanny, wouldn't mind pulling up the poll questions so we can dive in.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's roll through these. We asked you guys a handful of questions just to kind of get a grasp on where you're at. And the first one's important because it's like, again, the way we frame what inflammation is, I think that we need to be more nuanced in it because all you hear about is anti-inflammatories and these different things, but it's like you never really hear it painted in a positive light. And I love that we're the ones engaging in these kind of conversations. So the first one is when you think of inflammation, very simply, what comes to mind? And about 54% of you, most of you said pain or swelling. Absolutely. Part of the inflammatory process. 15% then said aging, and then 21% said autoimmunity, 10% said healing. I love where you guys are at. All of the above are correct, right? We're just going to dive into what it kind of really looks like and what it means. The second question is, how would you describe your current relationship with inflammation? And most of you say, you have inflammation, and you're absolutely right, right? I mean, all of us do. You can never take it all the way down to nothing. So all of us do have inflammation. I think that it's, again, a matter of acute, chronic, where is it coming from? Is it too much, etc. Smaller percentage, 14% said, I'm not sure, but I suspect it. 6% said no issues, fantastic. And then 11% said just here to learn, and you are all very welcome to be here. So then the third question, we get a little bit more into the antioxidants, supplemental and dietary antioxidants. So we asked, have you ever used antioxidants like vitamin C, turmeric, N-acetylcysteine, etc., for recovery or for wellness? And most of you use it daily, right? So 60% said yes, we use it daily. 32% said sometimes, occasional is great as well. 5% said rarely, and 3% said never. So we'll dive into some of the details of that. Like, is it for you? Is it not for you? What are some of the things that you can pinpoint from your genes and your lifestyle to know if it's actually an appropriate intervention for you or not? The fourth question is then, do you currently know anything about your inflammation-related genes? And pretty even split. So a third of you said yes, you've tested before. Just over a third said, I know a little bit. You'll know more at the end of tonight. And 29% said, completely new to me. Welcome to the webinar. And the last question, fifth and final, is what outcome do you hope to get from our webinar tonight? Pretty much everybody said all of the above, and I'm right there with you. We'll get to all of the above, but it was reduce inflammation. A little bit said improve energy. 16% said to learn about antioxidant timing, and that's a really nuanced thing that we'll get into. 5% said understanding my genetics. So I think we got a pretty good read on who's here today, Dr. K.
Yes, sir. And I think before we dive into our next conversation, I saw that Pam and a few other people have asked, like, hey, what genes are you going to be covering tonight? Because I'd like to look those up in advance of you guys discussing them. So first and foremost, I'd say, if you have your DNA 360 with us, feel free to jump into the portal or feel free to go into your app. This is hand signal for a cell phone. Go into your app. And we're going to be going through the following, and they will all be found in your inflammation or anti-inflammatory section. Okay, we're going to be looking at SOD2. We're going to be looking at GPX. We're going to be looking at GST M1, T1, and P1. So that's our happy little glutathione family. And you'll find that again in the anti-inflammatory reports. We're going to be looking at FUT2, which is in your diet and nutrition report. You can find that in your microbiome report specifically. And then we're also going to be looking at CYP1A2, which will be in your inflammation summary report. Yeah, all right, thanks. So for those that have their DNA 360, please make sure you have those because in about 20-ish minutes, give or take, we'll dive into some of the specifics of the genes.
Absolutely. And, we'll kind of preface this whole thing by just elaborating a little bit, right? So,
Yeah.
again, when we're talking about good and bad inflammation, I mean, it's like saying good or bad genes. It's not necessarily a one and done thing, but we want to make sure that we understand that the process of inflammation is meant to be acute, right? It's meant to be dealing with a temporary insult. I like to use the analogy of a bee sting, right? You get stung by a bee. Well, you absolutely want inflammation in that moment. It's going to swell up with water, and that quarantines the poison, and it makes it so that the poison can't become systemic. Obviously, with one bee, it's a very small amount. But if a beehive were to ever sting you, you don't want that becoming systemic, right? You want your body to have some stuff in place to effectively just isolate where that poison is. And then it flushes it, it deals with it with phase 1 and phase 2 detox, which we may get a little bit into. I think that this epidemic now of inflammation that we're dealing with really has a lot to do with how many various toxic insults we're dealing with in combination with people not understanding where their genetic weak points are, and then going ahead and intervening willy-nilly with, let's say,
Mhm.
high dose vitamin C, or just like high dose vitamin E, too much N-acetylcysteine, alpha lipoic acid, etc. And you're just sort of doing this trial and error thing, right? Like Dr. K and I see this all the time, the cycle of trial and error with interventions, and especially with supplements.
Yeah.
People suspect inflammation, and then they go ahead and they pile on certain supplements to kind of manage that. But if you do it without first identifying A, the source, and B, the
Mhm.
areas that your body is not doing well on its own when it
Yeah.
comes to the management of inflammation, I think that's where the mistake is being made. Um, do you agree on that, Dr. K? You think it's kind of a plethora of those two items?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree that the way we live is really subjecting us to more and more environmental insults. And I say that in the positive and negative way. The positive way meaning we're exposed to a lot more chemicals, we're exposed to a lot more day-to-day stresses, we're exposed to poor nutrition even when, we pick up a vegetable. That vegetable is not as nutritious as that vegetable might have been 50 years ago. So those insults, but I would also say the negative insults are the idea of we're not sleeping as much. And sleep is the one of, if not the best thing you can be doing to reduce your inflammation, right? So we're not sleeping as much, we're not resting as much. And when I say rest, I don't necessarily mean lying on the couch and watching TV, because I appreciate there's a lot of that going on, but more I mean in the sense of truly giving our mind and our nervous system that rest. So I think there's a lot more opportunity in the way we live, um, coupled with, to your point, there's a lot of social media ads and social media doctors and books and very well-intentioned people that are selling you. And what I see often is someone who has listened to a lot of information and has listened to a lot of intelligent people and picks up one supplement based on what Dr. So and so said, and then another supplement based on what this scientist said, and then another supplement based on what this blog post said. But at no point has that person per se gone to a doctor or a practitioner who, number one, knows their genes, number two, knows their life and knows truly what's going on within body, and then finding that accurate prescription. So often, and Justin, I know we've talked about this, we've each individually seen clients that come in with an extensively long laundry list that's worth thousands and thousands of dollars every month of all the things they're doing, and it's to a good end, right? They're doing their best to figure it out, but they're not considering A, is it actually targeting things, and B, like, can my body handle it? I think in terms of liver filtering, in terms of kidney filtering, but then also, as we're talking about today in this webinar, in terms of simply antioxidant balance. Is it too much? Is it tipping? Yeah. So, Justin, I'm glad to be exploring this with you today.
Yeah, well, and I love so this whole concept of redox homeostasis that I mentioned is really interesting, right? So I said it's reduction and it's oxidation. I love that it's called reduction because I always say that health coaching is often a process of deletion before it's a
Mhm.
process of addition, right? Like when I do my first session with somebody, it's very rare that I do some protocol overload thing and just give them a big long laundry list of things that they need to add. Usually it's like, here's the list of things they're doing, and I need to go in and reduce first, right? We delete and then we add, because this protocol overload is like, if you spend your whole day just trying to load your body up with as many different things as you possibly can, you can blunt some of the good things that your body would have done naturally anyway. And B, you end up, again, the cycle of trial and error. You're buying things, you're trying different stuff without actually targeting it in any real way. So reduction is very interesting, right? Because when you first start doing some of these protocols, right, like a hormetic stress, let's say you hop in the sauna. Fantastic. I'm a really big fan of it. If you were to double up, because biohackers, we think like this, let's double up, right? And you were to take,
It's true.
it is true.
It's
And
very
if
true.
you take like a really big dose, let's say of glutathione prior to getting in the sauna, thinking that you're doubling up on the benefits, what can happen is, because of the reduction element, you're actually blunting some of the positive effects that you would have got from that hormetic stress, right?
Mhm.
So when we talk about hormesis, we talk about things like, weightlifting, exercise. We talk about fasting. We talk about heat and cold exposure and these different hormetic stressors. They're very valuable. But if you were to take in synthetic antioxidants with it, those antioxidants will make it so that the natural pulse and response that you would get from that hormesis is blunted. It's actually less, right? So the appropriate interventions is what we want, and then the timing of those interventions as well. I don't like taking massive amounts of antioxidants surrounding a hormetic stress, um, right? Like, for example, if I were to crush a big old leg day, you don't want to do leg day and then immediately start popping as many antioxidants and anti-inflammatories as humanly possible, because we want that natural response. You've injured yourself in the gym. It's okay. You tore down your myofibrils. That's what you wanted to do, right? So if you're going to immediately blunt your body's normal, natural kind of response to that injury, you're not getting that adaptation. You're actually blunting the adaptation that you were after in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I like that specific example, because I think a lot of people will treat every day as the same, even though the stresses and the good stresses within the day are not necessarily the same. Right. And so I like, especially like for someone that like yourself, Justin, who is an elite athlete, right? Someone who trains beyond just, oh, I want to be fit. You do it to the end of, I have these specific fitness goals. Knowing how your supplements can either support that goal or take from that goal becomes really important. And I would offer to, I think to the females listening, right? In particular, females that are still within their menstruation cycle, right? I think through, not all days of the cycle are created equal when it comes to inflammation, right? The first half of the cycle, that tends to be a point, especially when estrogen is more dominant, that we are much more in the space of healing and inflammation resilient. Meaning, if you go do that leg day, you have the appropriate kind of isolated inflammation response that supports growth of vessels. If you, though, have that same leg day within the second half of your cycle, especially I'm talking of a typical 28-day cycle, but especially in and around day 21 or closer to period, when all the hormones are flowing and all of that concert of hormone lends to more of an environment of inflammation, right? That's kind of that cumulative impact that inflammation can then be tipped into the not so great space. You're not necessarily going to get that muscle building and muscle repair that you want. And so this is the insight, especially as you think through what your goals are and recognizing how your lifestyle and your body and the natural function of your body contributes to these different things becomes important, because that not only informs how do you go about reducing inflammation when it's appropriate, sometimes to Justin's point, workouts, saunas, right? Things like that, all of that creates inflammation in good ways. But knowing those points of inflammation in your life, the good and the bad, then speaks to how do you intelligently support that, both with rest and sleep, right? Got to think about that first, but then separate and additional to that, all the happy little supplements that we love to put on our laundry list.
Absolutely. And there is a really big difference to mention here between like supplemental antioxidants and the more dietary based antioxidants, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
if we just say antioxidants, I mean, understand that there's there's a pretty big difference, right? Like I think that people have heard some of these studies where they talk about like post-exercise adaptation being blunted with antioxidants, which is exactly what I just said, and that can happen. But understand that when you have like an isolated form, right? Like if you have like a big dose of synthetic vitamin C, vitamin E, ALA, glutathione, etc., it's pretty different than if you were to have like blueberries in your post-workout smoothie. You know what I mean? Like there's the volume matters here too.
Yes.
The dosage matters, and then whether or not it's kind of naturally occurring or not will also matter. There's
Hmm.
some really strong antioxidants that I'm a really big fan of. Like I love carbon 60 is one that I talk about a lot. You know, it's a peptide that's a very strong moderator of this whole redox thing. It's important to know though that the research isn't all the way there with some of these things like carbon 60 to where they don't really know in human models if it clears ROSs so quickly that it blunts the exercise response or not. So with some of these really powerful supplements, I err on the side of caution and I just take them way away from any of these hormetic stressors that I might do. But if I'm going to make a smoothie post workout, I'm just still going to put a little bit of strawberries or something in there because A, it's delicious. B, I've earned it. And then C, it is going to buffer it just a little bit without having that blunting effect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like the reliance on food sources, I think, and spices and stuff that are really high
Mm.
ORAC. There's a thing called the ORAC scale, which kind of measures antioxidant capacity of
Mhm.
foods. And there's mint and clove, and there's a
Mhm.
couple cool things that are really high on there.
Mhm.
Relying on that is a lot better, I think, as far as your day-to-day usage, and then only
Yeah.
choose when to up the ante with the real intense antioxidants supplementally. That's what I think.
There was a really elegant study done. It was either in the 80s or 90s, and this was kind of before much of some of the supplement hype that we see now, or at least the very refined supplement hype. And this study looked at a general American population, so no one exceptionally sick, but no one exceptionally healthy. And they asked the question of if we required that these people put 2 tablespoons of herbs and spices, and this is dried herbs and spices, so that there's a bit of like, they could standardize because we know that fresh versus dried is different. So 2 tablespoons of dried herb and spices scattered throughout the day. So it wasn't like you had to do like this mega shot. You could put them in your food throughout the day. The goal was just to do those 2 tablespoons over the span. I believe it was 2 months. I think it was approximately 60 days. Within this group of people who maybe had moderate spices, but not kind of as much as 2 tablespoons, which as someone that cook, it's not that much. This isn't a scary amount. Um, but they found that inflammatory markers amongst these people changed nothing else. They just made sure that they got those into their meals, throughout the day. They saw all their general inflammation markers go down. So I think, Justin, I really love that you're bringing out the point of supplements are important. I want to talk about the strategy of them, throughout maybe the menstrual cycle, maybe throughout different training cycles. I want to talk about that. But I also really want to emphasize it doesn't have to start in a pill. Ideally, it starts on your plate. And if you hear nothing else today, if you're looking for something to reduce your general inflammation, 2 tablespoons of dried herbs per day. Gonna get you. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and it's kind of a cool thing, right? Where the body makes antioxidants, and then we're supposed to eat the rest, right?
Mhm.
So there's the body makes toxins, and then we take in toxins. The body makes antioxidants, and then we take in antioxidants. That's what this whole concept of homeostasis is. It's just that how do we harness it, right?
Yeah.
Because we know that we're taking in a heck of a lot of toxins now. We know that, let's say you are an athlete. I mean, your body's going to make it, man. Every time that you're metabolizing and creating energy, you're also creating byproducts, reactive oxygen species, reactive nitrogen species. These things are being accumulated endogenously, regardless of the smog outside and the mold and all these different things. So our body is just fighting to be pulled back into the middle. And I think that in the absence of genetic information, it can be really difficult to pinpoint where the heck your inflammation is coming from. Like truly, I always talk about this identify the arsonist thing, right? Where
Mm.
it's like, who's lighting fires? Because I can run around individually and put out the fires, but until I've really figured out who keeps lighting them we're still going to have a problem with things being inflammation.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
So the genes and the genetic information are very important to understand here because that allows us to alter our epigenetic behaviors. Right. That's all we do have control over, but we have a lot more to go off of if you understand the genes first. Right. And remember that a gene has a job to do. Like when we think about genes, I just look at it like a community and different people. There's a fireman there and there's an electrician there and there's a job for each and every one of them. Now, if we know that you have a genotype, that means that this job is not being done very well. It's a slacker, he's on his lunch break or whatever it is all day long. That area, that job is going to need to be reinforced with what we control, our epigenetics, right? So, like a great example, I have poor SOD2. That's something that we're going to talk about tonight. Well,
Mhm.
I go out of my way to make sure that I improve that antioxidation with some of these different herbs, spices, hormetic stressors, and supplemental antioxidants as well, because I've identified an arsonist, right? I'm an athlete with bad mitochondrial toxin clearance. So that's not a good combination, right? So
Mhm.
knowing that, I'm able to now harness my epigenetic behaviors and get a lot more out of it. So I think it's probably time we dive into some of these genes, Dr. K, because they're very important.
Well, let's do it. I love it. Yeah. And before we do, I'm seeing in the chat from a few people asking what types of herbs and spices and if it matters. Um, the study, like it was specific as to it was herbs. Herbs, think of like sage and oregano and thyme and things of that nature, but then also included other spices, which would have included like Caribbean or Indian spices like the cloves, the allspice, cinnamon, things of that nature. And I would offer, I'll be plain, I don't remember specifically what the study was. I read this a long time ago, but I would offer variety is going to be the key in the spice of life here. If you're doing 2 tablespoons of cinnamon, for example, there's beautiful polyphenols in there, but you're missing out other polyphenols and other antioxidants in the other guys. So I would encourage that you buy a whole spice drawer and you rotate through different elements of that every day, and you'll probably develop some taste preferences. I love spicy things, so cayenne is always in my spice rotation. But then things like, cumin, there's other things that can be tossed in there, especially based on what you're eating. Have fun and play with your food, learn about it.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that there's also even genetic considerations within what spices may or may not be right for you, right? And there's a
Mhm.
couple of things to consider here. So the one thing I always preach on these webinars is food sensitivity screening, because you can be sensitive to cinnamon, you can be sensitive to a
Mm.
lot of
Yeah.
things. And on paper, these things are anti-inflammatory, and then you've actually
Mhm.
added an arsonist if it's something that your immune system, yours, chooses
Mhm.
to react to for whatever reason. It makes the antibody. It says, I don't know about that. And then the antibodies have this weird thing where they kind of imprint on themselves, and they have like a mirror so that other cells can see it. So, like, for example, I have a gluten sensitivity, right? I've completely cut it out. It's just something I had to do. It sucks. But even
Yeah.
if I were to overdo grains, other grains, the molecule looks close enough to gluten that you can react to grains even though there's no actual gluten in there. And on the package, it says gluten free. So just understanding the genetic points to this, as well as food sensitivities, and then know that there's nuances within the genes as well. We'll get into the genes in just a second.
Mhm.
For example, curcumin, turmeric, right? That can actually have an impact on a gene called CYP1A2. Now,
Mhm.
CYP1A2, we talk about it as far as like caffeine metabolism and other stimulants as well. It's actually a phase 1 detox enzyme, right? So it can be sped up or slowed down. Turmeric can have the effect of slowing down CYP1A2. I love turmeric, curcumin. I think it's a fantastic anti-inflammatory,
It's
but you
so
got to be careful, right? It's good. It's good for lots of stuff, but especially in supplement format, understand that if your CYP1A2 gene is slow, curcumin, big doses, can slow it down further, and you may actually impair phase 1 detoxification with that. Cruciferous vegetables, though, they can speed up CYP1A2. So let's say it's slow. Adding those in can speed it back up. So even spices is my point. Even that we want to have some level of direction and not do the cycle of trial and error, add them in willy-nilly.
Yeah, I would offer though, usually the dietary amounts that you're getting from herbs and spices aren't going to be shifting your phase one and two much. Justin's talking specific to when you take in a capsule or when you're taking in more medicinal dosing of these things. So if you're trying to toss in some curcumin or some turmeric, sorry, to that 2 tablespoons, you're fine. Don't stress that. It's just when we get into like the actual capsules.
Yeah, big old concentrated doses of it.
Yes,
Um,
sir. All
all
right.
right, so I mentioned CYP1A2. That's a great gene to start with. Let's talk about some other genes. Which ones do you want to tackle? And then I'll tackle some
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, well, you've alluded to this, and so I think I'm just going to kind of circle us through because I know you love my analogy for this. Let's talk about SOD2 and GPX. All right, so Justin's already given a little bit of context to this. These are two guys that work to support the cleaning within the mitochondria. Okay. So mitochondria, for Justin in particular, because I'm just a pretend athlete for the real athletes out there, your mitochondria is, most people hear sleeper cell. If I say, what is the mitochondria? You all will reply, powerhouse of the cell. It's also a really important immune director. Does a lot of intracellular, or sorry, yeah, intra and intercellular communication. So within the same cell and then with adjacent cells. So your mitochondria does a lot. You can kind of think about it like your kitchen because in your kitchen, two different things happen. First and foremost, you do all your cooking. That's where you get your fuel, right? You cook in the kitchen with all the spices and herbs that we've talked about, and you get fueled up. As well in the kitchen, hopefully, ideally, you may be sitting down with family and having conversation. How was your day? What's going great for you? What's not going great for you? So there's that sharing of information. But think about this. If you don't clean your kitchen after a meal, after cooking, are people going to come back to your kitchen? The answer is no, because eventually it's going to get dirty, and then it's going to be a risk of when you eat that food, you're going to get sick. SOD and GPX are the guys that support cleaning within the mitochondria. So when Justin goes out and does his massive leg day, and the mitochondria is like, yo, you just made me cook a lot. The mitochondria then needs to come in and repair and clean because it's doing all that over time. SOD and GPX are really giving us insight. For those that aren't athletes, maybe like myself, think about this time in anything really that is exertion that can be mental, or for those that aren't well, for those kind of with that chronic inflammation or chronic illness, these pathways tend to get absolutely exhausted, especially in long haul COVID. That tends to be where a lot of the research effort is going now. So when you look at your genes, we're really looking for some balance between these two genes. Okay, so SOD is the first actor in this cleanup space. Kind of think about SOD as the guy that picks up a dish and scrubs it down. So that first scrubbing, you're getting rid of all of the food and the dirt and whatever else might be on that dish. But when SOD is done, when you're done cleaning that dish, there's still soap on it. So it's not fully clean yet. That's where GPX comes in, and GPX is the guy that is going to rinse it so that you rinse that dish and you're quite literally just left with a clean dish. So what I would encourage when you're looking in your report, when you're in that anti-inflammatory section, I'm not, it is important how fast the rate of cleaning dishes both of these go at, but I would also really encourage you to look at the balance between them. Ideally, you have a balance between how quickly you're soaping your dishes and how quickly you're rinsing your dishes. Okay, so again, this is going to be in your anti-inflammatory section, and we will pointedly call out for you. This one goes faster, slow. This one goes faster, slow, and you want to be thinking about the balance. And if you're out of balance, that shifts how you might want to be approaching rest, and it shifts how you might want to be approaching supplements that support that rest, especially after exertion. So on Justin's leg days. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts? Like, how do you support yours, given you very purposely have multiple leg days, and this isn't a strong system for you?
Yeah, so it's really important to remember here that so our body makes antioxidants and we take in antioxidants. We make toxins, we take in toxins. So it's really this balancing act. So one of the first things that I would recommend if you have suboptimal SOD2, I saw some people in the comments that have the TT genotype. That's what Coach Justin has as well. And we want to make sure that you have sort of the same speed between the SOD2 as well as the GPX. And if you don't, I'm seeing more stuff in the comments, people who don't, you want to make sure that you're supporting as much from your epigenetic behavior standpoint as you can. So what I do is there's a few strategies, right? So again, dietary antioxidants are among the top of my list. I add them into pretty much every meal that I can because I know that they're not going to blunt the hormetic effect of exercise. They're not going to blunt that adaptation that I'm after, but they are going to start to support the pathway with relative consistency. Right. So I make sure that my diet is on point. That's the low hanging fruit, non sexy piece to this that you don't want to hear. Beyond that, I use certain supplements that are what's called redox agents. Now, Dr. K and I have a slight disagreement on this next one, but do your research, check out our webinars. I like hydrogen. Now, I use hydrogen specifically because I have bad genes for this, and my lifestyle is not that supportive of what my genes suggest. So, if you're out of alignment with what your genes say, you may need some pretty powerful agents in there to help. So, go ahead, Dr. K. You're muted.
Course I am. I would also offer, though, I think for you specifically, I think audience, we have a lot of webinars on hydrogen water, and we're going to toss those in the chat so you can see them. But I would offer there's very robust, good data supporting athletes taking hydrogen after the fact. So please, Justin and I and Dr. Varden go at this topic. And so please do check out that webinar because I think it's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason why I like it is because it's what's called a redox agent, right? So it's not the same thing as just blanketly adding in some really powerful antioxidants, which, like we mentioned, can have that negating effect. Anything like molecular hydrogen or methylene blue, something that's a redox agent, it's very intelligent and it doesn't overdo it. So it won't over antioxidize the area either. What it does is it basically goes in and it senses, is there too many oxidants or is there too much antioxidants? And it helps to restore the homeostasis in the mitochondria. So this is something that I take immediately post exercise. I drink it down. You should be hydrating anyways. I add some minerals and stuff into it. But that's a way for me to sort of override my suboptimal genetics as well as my lifestyle that is not in concordance with those suboptimal genetics. Methylene blue, in my opinion, is also quite useful here. I don't think that everybody should just blanket take methylene blue, but mitochondrial concerns, I think that it's got its value when you've already got dietary antioxidants and these other hormetic components in place. So I supplement pretty specifically with that. I love doing the sauna, the grounding, the cold. All of these hormetic agents are very valuable for the mitochondria, and we just sort of balance it out. Now, you're going to want to have some lab work surrounding this circumstance as well. And the marker that I'm in love with for this is called 8-OHDG. That's 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine. And it's a pretty direct marker of oxidative stress when it is, in fact, present in the mitochondria. And that oxidative stress can damage your DNA. When you keep your eyes on 8-OHDG, you can now see if your interventions are actually having an effect or not. Mine used to be higher, and then I added in these different interventions. I swapped some different things around. I'll admit I took the odd recovery day that I didn't used to take, and my 8-OHDG numbers are now very much in range, right? So understand the genes, understand the lifestyle, understand the lab markers, and then add in interventions as you see fit. So that's what I do. Mitochondria are among my top priorities all the time.
Yeah. I love in what you've just said, though, Justin, and audience, please do hear this. Justin just talked about testing and not guessing, that as he introduced supplements to the end of reducing a very specific sort of inflammation to him, he then tested and followed up. That really speaks to, again, we started this with statements of, it's very human and natural to listen to a doctor talk about a supplement and bring that in. And then, at the end of the year, you have an incredibly long list that isn't necessarily specific to what you're going after. The power of working with a provider, the power of knowing your genes, is you're much more informed about what you're tracking. So that list becomes smaller. And more importantly, that list is actually supporting your health, right? This is where we are a genetic company truly because we believe in this level of individualization. I don't have a great sod, but I promise the supplements I'm supporting my sod with are very different than the ones that Justin is, because Justin's an athlete and I am most definitely not. The stresses on our mitochondria are very different. So even though technically we have the same gene, it's that context of life and it's that context of what's going on and what are you trying to achieve that is also informing things. So please take away a lot from what we're saying as well, but also really consider working with a provider that can really offer that more fine-tuned advice so that especially your supplement dollars go further and actually support what you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's a really important relationship between genetics and then lab work. Like I've said this before, that I consider
Mm.
the DNA 360 to be like foundational lab work for anybody. It is a lab, right? And
Yeah.
it's something that you do, and it gives you massive amounts of information about your body. The problem comes in that, like, so if you have these genes and then you have this lifestyle, we need to really know, how is it all balancing out? How is it equaling out?
Mhm.
Right. So that's where good quality, like metabolic panels and things like that, come
Mhm.
in. You can really understand your genes and then know if your lifestyle and your epigenetic behavioral traits are causing or amplifying the problem, or if it's negating the problem presented by what your genes and genotypes are. Right.
Mhm.
So there you go. Oxidative stress, 8-OHDG. These are the genes. This is the marker. These are the lifestyle traits. In the
Mhm.
glutathione section is another great example, right? So we look at three different genes there. We look at GSTT1, big brother or sister of the glutathione family, very important,
Mhm.
but a little bit concentrated to the liver. So, okay, let's look at that. If you have, let's say, suboptimal genotype here, it's basically a copy number variation. So, how many did you get? You might be missing copies of this, and that
Mhm.
can certainly compromise liver function if your epigenetics are not correct there. So once we identify, okay, there's a potential here for liver issues. Okay, well, what's my lifestyle like? How many pharmaceuticals am I on? Do I drink? Do I eat junk food? Let's control that. And then you may want to keep your eyes on the associated lab markers,
Mhm.
right? Liver enzymes, urinary bile acids. You can see if there's liver congestion going on. And that really helps you with the guidance of a clinician to adjust your interventions, right? So we get a good eyes on the downstream with the labs, we got eyes on the upstream with the genes, and then you got a coach, right, helping you with the lifestyle behaviors. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Healthcare should look like, as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. And I love that you're looping labs into that. And I would also say, like, knowing your genes in this instance, in particular, knowing your GSTs, that glutathione family, that transfer family, can also, to an extent, manage expectations and how you navigate life. So, for example, I've noticed that people with poor GST family numbers, so poor copy number variations, deleted genes, if you will, meaning they don't make the enzyme, they don't have that function there. When they're exposed to an environmental stress, right? For some people, that could be an airplane ride because there's a lot of chemicals there. For other people, that can be, I just went through exam season and so I wasn't sleeping and I was doing all these crazy things. For other people, that can be, occupational, right? If you have an occupation that exposes you to these chemicals, right? Their capacity to detox that is weakened, which means if you are exposed to it, sometimes you can't control it. You have to be all the more directed and intelligent around how do you recover after the fact. So, for example, people who, let's say, don't have great copy number variation for their GSTs and they take a flight, they should be aware that first day on the ground, independent of jet lag and whatever else might be going on, their body's trying to clean up a lot. They're probably not doing it at a quick rate. And so they should be thinking through, what is my supplement kit that's going to help my body clean this out, as well as, am I going to rest more to support that, right? Knowing your genes is very powerful in terms of oxidative and awareness of what your oxidative burden is, your inflammatory burden is, because a plane ride that someone with good GST gets on versus someone without, they're going to have a different, body burden at the end of it and a different body cleanup effort at the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, when it comes to supplements, there's a couple of other considerations here too, in that Number one, this is a part of our strategies, and it's very rarely the first part, right? Like we like to kind of add in some of the other epigenetic behaviors as well. But when it comes to kind of categorizing supplements, there's a few ways to go about it. Are you familiar, Dr. K, with the four S's? Have you ever heard of that when it comes to supplementation?
Can you give me the four S's and I'll give you an answer?
It's substitute, stimulate, self-treat, and there's another one. But I like the way that they do it because it makes you think about the purpose behind the supplement, right? It's
Mm,
like, am I substituting something here? Which
mm,
is, in my view, if you have suboptimal genes in an area, I'm substituting. Stimulate is the other one. So in
mm,
some other circumstances, I may need to stimulate, let's say, cortisol. Maybe I'm just at a point of HPA axis dysfunction where I'm no longer making cortisol. Well, I may need to take something to up that, right? So that
mhm,
would be stimulate. Self-treat is really for like pathogens and things like that. If you've got issues and your doctor is just kind of offering drugs and things like that, but you want to do it on your own,
mhm,
self-treat would be that last category. And I think that any supplement you take, you should really ask yourself that strong why and what is the
mhm.
purpose for this
Yeah,
supplement? Is it just
yeah,
kind of cool? Did I hear something about it? Or is it substituting? Is it stimulating? Is it supporting or self-treating?
yeah.
If you can really identify the why behind each and everything in that supplement cabinet, you'll see how many of them are just kind of fluff or just seem like a good idea. And that can help you whittle that list down to only what's important and what you need, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and I would offer as well, like we've gone through two examples of, or at least, sorry, Justin, you've gone through two examples of supplements that for many people may be a good thing, but for certain people are not. So, for example, you talked about curcumin in the instance of someone having a slower CYP1A2, as well as um, broccoli extracts or the sulforaphanes, for people of the same genotype, how those kind of land in very different ways for those people. So knowing this, knowing what you're chasing and knowing how your body responds to it is part of that checklist that Justin went through and very important because the supplement that is good for me may be bad for Justin and vice versa. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. There's really so much of this we're talking about detoxification. And it's important to know that when we say phase one, phase two, we really mean that. Like there is more than one phase. There's
Mm.
actually three phases to detoxification.
Third's important. No one talks about the third.
Yeah, most important because without the third one, you're not actually getting rid of anything, right? You have to
Mm.
actually sweat and go to the bathroom and what have you. But there's so like I mentioned, CYP1A2. Well, that's phase one. A lot of these glutathione genes represent phase two,
Mhm.
and we want those to be a similar speed as well because if you have really poor phase one detoxification and really good glutathionization, you can end up with a similar imbalance to what Dr. K said with SOD2 and
Mhm.
GPX, right? We want a nice flow of all of our detoxification processes because phase one and phase two, there's actually intermediate chemicals that get made between those two, and it's really toxic, right? So your body actually changes fat soluble toxins around to make them water soluble. But in the process of doing that, it makes its own toxins that are more toxic than the original toxin, right? So
Mhm.
this is really important to get right. And that's why I recommend if this is a bit confusing to get a session with a clinician who can walk you through it, because there's different ways that you can approach this to put your body back into that state of balance.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Don't be your own doctor. And I say that to myself as much as I say that to anyone else. I don't design my own supplement regime because I'm too biased. All right. Justin, any thoughts? Like I know we want to start thinking about transitioning into questions and answers. Before we do that, I think we caught all the genes that we wanted to speak to today. Is there anything else that you felt lingering or that you want to say before we jump in to the audience has been generous with us today. There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, we definitely want to make sure we have time for that. Um, I would definitely make a quick note about what I said with regard to food-based antioxidants
Mm,
versus synthetic antioxidants. Understand that for you to get like 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C from your diet, right, or any of these antioxidants, in nature, you would have had to have eaten so much of these different fruits and things like that. Like it's really unnatural to just dose your body up with some of these synthetics. So I'm always aware of that. Like most of the antioxidants that I take in, even if it's a supplement, it's more of a food supplement. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like I try to pay attention to sourcing and things like that. There's various competing pathways with different vitamins and minerals and things as well. So when we take in larger doses of synthetic forms, you can actually counterbalance some of the other really vital nutrients, right? Like, for example, zinc and copper. That's one that a lot of people know about. Well, if I'm going to take a synthetic zinc supplement that's pretty high dosed, I may actually end up deficient in copper because the receptor sites on the cells, there's competition there, right? So I'm really careful about synthetic supplements. I only recommend getting them from trusted sources, high quality sources, and a little bit of guidance can go a long way because you can actually deplete one by adding in volume of another.
Yeah. Yeah. No, agreed. Agreed. And I think interestingly, most people I think that come to see us or other practitioners for supplement advice, they're always shocked that they come out with a significantly smaller list because the goal is rest and food first, and then very targeted, intelligent, high quality supplements. Yeah. 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 Often customized too, which is something fun that you do.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm really involved with our black label formulas, and that's something that we've worked really hard on. I mean, you've worked even harder than I have on the whole black label thing, and it's really just because we wanted to find a way to work with compounding pharmacies to make sure that we have really good quality supplements at our beck and call, but then have a system in place that we can use the genes and bounce it off of various metrics to actually have personalized supplements. I think a lot of people say that their company makes personalized supplements, and it's like, well, what's it really based on? Usually not a lot, where we're taking into account a whole bunch of different things to make sure that it's right, make sure that it's not going to interact poorly with medications. I mean, when I
Mm.
make a formula for somebody, I filter it and filter it and filter it until I get to something that I know is going to be the best case scenario. And that's something that we've worked quite a bit with the black label formulation. So we're proud of that, Dr. K and myself.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I'm very personally proud as well of the individualization that we capture. It starts off with an algorithm, but then it finishes on a very personalized human touch, which I think is really important because no two genes are created the same, no two people are created the same. Yeah.
Absolutely. AI will never fully replace me or Dr. K, right? It can't. We're the human touch, I think, is really important.
True, but I still have a goal of being a cyborg. So my goal is that I'm part and parcel with AI one day. One day. I'm weird. It's okay. Why don't we jump into some questions and answers before we really go down the rabbit hole of where I'd like to land in my life?
Absolutely. Let's
Yeah,
do it.
yeah.
Okay, so Candace has our first one. What does it mean when you don't have the GSTM1 gene? So Candace is referencing what we call the double null,
Mhm.
right? So we have these copy number variations, and you can have 0, 1, or 2 copies. How many did you get from your parents? And by the way, Candace, I have 0 copies as well of GSTM1. So it's different than a SNP. It's like, it's not what form of the gene did you get? You're missing it, right? And when we remember that, like I mentioned earlier, genes represent a job that need be done. Well, this is a job that is definitely going to be lacking at a baseline. And
Mhm.
GSTM1 is an important part of the phase 2 detox, and it's a little more concentrated to the gut.
Mhm.
So basically, you and I are lacking the gut detox genes, right? And knowing, unfortunately, what we've done to the food supply, I think that it's one of the more important genes to consider. It's usually one of the main ones I bring up if I see a double null, because it basically means that our body is not effectively ramping up detox when it senses toxins. And that could be glyphosate, right? That could be things that come alongside the food. But we're missing that gene. So you are missing the GSTM1. That means that your body is not detoxing as well at the level of the gut than we might like. So certain interventions can be valuable there. I mean, I'd recommend a coaching session if you really want to get deep in. But things like fulvic minerals, fasting may be appropriate. I'm a fan of structured silver, activated charcoal, doing the food sensitivity screening. All of those things can be really valuable. Same with gut mapping. Like we have the gut 360, and that can be really valuable as well to see just how compromised your gut might be, because your whole life you've been missing one of the primary detox genes. So prioritize that gut, Candace. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, our next question is coming from Sheila, and they're asking if we have an opinion on, I'm not sure if I'm going to be saying this correctly, but uh, ASA, redox water, um, uh, for specifically a child on the spectrum, and if there's genomic profiles that should avoid it. I'm not overly familiar, but it sounds like it is a water that has very specific electrolytes in it so that you can stabilize things. I'd have to look into some of the research behind the company, but I would say that firstly, when I think of a child on the spectrum, there's a lot that can be done, and I would want to go to the more validated things first and foremost before wrapping in these. So if you're looking for that sort of support, I would definitely speak with a practitioner first, because I think there's many things that can probably be done before this. And again, I haven't looked at the research, right? So I want to acknowledge that. And then are there certain genetic profiles that should be avoiding this? Again, it really would depend on what exactly that label is claiming to do. But again, I'd really emphasize that often if you have genes that struggle with some of this inflammation or within the mitochondrial redox balance, there's many other agents that have been studied to support that. So that would be my first go. But again, I have not seen the research there, and so I can't speak too in depth about it. But for anyone with a condition, right, really working with a provider who has worked with that condition before to vet these things becomes very, very important. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Justin, who's next?
So Glenda is next, and
Mhm.
Glenda is saying that you're not seeing the CYP1A2 and that you do have the CYP2R1. So the CYP2R1 is the vitamin D. That's like the first one we look at for vitamin D. CYP1A2 is a little bit sneaky. It's actually in your gene cast for the anti-inflammatory reports. If you go into those, you'll see a gene cast, right, where it's like each gene and the genotype is in brief red for you. And that's one of the cool things we do. I love the gene casts. So if you go into the anti-inflammatory profile and you go into the gene cast and scroll down, that's where it's located. I know this because each and every patient I have, I sort through the report to find the CYP1A2 just because I know that it's in there. So that's where you would find it. There's A's and C's. I believe A's are slower and C's are faster. And again, that's going to be relevant for caffeine and stimulant metabolism as well as phase one detoxification.
Mhm. Okay. Um, Our next question is from Robin. So Robin is saying some people have sensitivities to salicylates, I hope I said that right, and other constituents of food, especially spices, and so this can be problematic. And so she's kind of coming back to where we talked about 2 tablespoons of herbs and spices per day. Um, and so essentially asking how do you adjust to that? So what I would offer, and I think I saw a few questions like this, I'm on this specific diet that says I can't have that. The phrase the spice of life, right? There's variety to the spice of life, comes for a reason. There are hundreds of different herbs out there. And so for certain conditions, for certain people, there may be many herbs that don't feel good in the body when you're having them, right? And so I would strongly encourage, if that is you, not to be having those, right? But if you go to the grocery store, you'll see there's many, many other ones. And so what I would offer is, number one, work with a provider who is aware of your condition. They probably have a working list of what herbs and spices are appropriate for you or not. If you're not with a provider, or there's an appointment that maybe is a week or two off, Dr. Google, toss in as well there, that would be able to give you a bit of or even Dr. ChatGPT, give you a little bit of a list rundown. But I would really encourage you to connect with a provider, again, because getting those polyphenols, etc., in there become really important, but we don't want to be aggravating. And so while all of it is always going to be trial and error, thankfully practitioners can kind of cut down on some of that and then really help with the condition as well. So there's my thoughts there. All right.
Yeah, and I would also add to that that, sometimes when there's, let's say, mucosal barrier injury or some level of that, I mean, it can really amplify a lot of these things and make it so that you're a lot more sensitive to various different areas. So there can be certain things that it can be stemming from, right? Where sometimes the correction of some of these baseline systems, I've seen it help a lot of people that have a lot of issues with different stuff. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So, like, I think that it's not actually called leaky gut, but mucosal barrier issues. I think that they amplify a lot of that in people, and I've seen people have to go the route of like these reductionist diets, and I'm a fan of autoimmune paleo and different approaches for getting a lot of reactive foods and different things away.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll say that it's really common that people just have issues with their mucosal barrier, and that makes it so that you're way more prone to having sensitivities as well. Um,
Yeah.
so sometimes identifying that with a proper assessment and then building it back up and fixing that layer, that
Yeah.
can make it so that your food sensitivity list drops like this. Mine's all the way down to sesame seeds and rye bread. That's all I'm
Oh,
sensitive to, and that's out of 180 foods.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
more work you do on your gut, your liver, right, enterohepatic
Mm-hmm.
circulation, these different things, you can improve the actual terrain, which can improve these circumstances as well. So
Yeah.
don't give up hope on that. You may be able to add those things in someday.
I agree. That's a beautiful point. The work and effort that you put into identifying what isn't working for you, doing that healing means the opportunity of slowly bringing things back in, which is a beautiful thing because food is delightful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
And Justin, I think this question's for you.
Yeah, Dr. K knows that I really like ketones. I like messing around with ketones. Fun fact, I've never done a webinar without having ketones in my body like half an hour prior to doing it because it tends to kind of turn my brain on. So the question from David is, do you have anything to say about the ability of ketone ester supplements on inflammation? Although quite costly, I've used it for a variety of inflammatory conditions and have had some positive effects.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think that they are very valuable there. I think that, you know, going into ketosis is one of these things that has some pretty magical healing abilities on the body, right? It can help rewire your metabolism. It can benefit your brain. It can benefit your hormones. It's actually a detoxification strategy for a lot of people because it can really help to clear different things out when you go into ketosis. Going into it via fasting and dietary intervention can be really painful, right? Because it's not just carbohydrates you have to restrict protein to an extent as well. So getting into ketosis how our ancestors did is pretty difficult. But now with things like esters, I mean, you can get into it in about 20 minutes and start to get some of those metabolic benefits. So, hey, if a lot of your inflammation is coming from mitochondria, well, we know that ketone esters have a pretty good effect on mitochondria. They give your body that next energy source, right? Like we talk about fatty acid oxidation and glycolysis, and there's these macronutrients that give our body the raw ingredients to make ATP through the Krebs cycle. Ketones are the fourth macronutrient. It's something that the cells can burn. They can use them directly, right? Once the liver makes them. So when you take an ester, it's very different than an MCT oil or beta hydroxybutyrate. It's way more powerful, right? So it's like a really strong ketone ester, and you can up your blood ketones pretty significantly in a short period of time. I've absolutely seen people get great cognitive benefits, great mitochondrial benefits. And I think that the anti inflammatory effects are a little bit more of a byproduct than a direct effect. But yeah, I think that they do help with some of the anti inflammatory, especially if some of it's coming from that mitochondrial component. I love them. I use them not every day, but I use them pretty often. I'm a big fan.
Nice. Love it. I always
Yeah.
defer to you when it comes to ketones, so I have nothing else to say. All right. David, a different David, has another question for us. So this David is asking, autoimmune diseases like psoriasis cause inflammation. Can you ramp that down naturally? And the answer is absolutely. Um, there's a plethora of different things. I think what's really cool, as uncool as autoimmune is, the cool thing is there's a lot of different ways. So first and foremost, I'd say check with a practitioner because we need to know what type of autoimmune and what else is going on in your world. For one specific fun insight, though, I will direct you to your HLA gene. And so you can find this in our diet and nutrition report, specifically under carbohydrates. And so HLA, remember that genes, kind of think about genes as a book. And we know that in books, there's many, many different pages. And we know that in books, not all pages are created equal because some pages are going to have plot points, whereas other pages are just going to be loving descriptions that ultimately may not be relevant to the plot, but beautiful to read. So when we're looking at the HLA gene, we're looking at very specific pages that have plot points. So the pages that we look at are very specific to gluten, and they answer one of two questions. Is there a genetic risk for celiac disease? And is there a genetic risk for gluten sensitivity? I'm going to focus. So celiac is an autoimmune condition. You consume wheat, the body identifies it in a way that it shouldn't and essentially attacks itself. Okay. Separate to that is gluten sensitivity, where the body identifies that or reacts to that in a very inflamed way. Celiac is part of that autoimmune family. Autoimmune diseases, unfortunately, never like to go to the bathroom alone. They tend to bring all their friends. And so if you have one, chances of having several increases, as well as separate to even that celiac question, if there's inflammation, it can crop up. There's some really neat work done in the 90s and 2000s that strongly correlates gluten sensitivity to autoimmune conditions to the end that through most of them, not all, because not all have been studied, but things like thyroid disease, rheumatoid arthritis, the major big hitters, when you're consuming gluten in those conditions, it is almost categorically always aggravating and worsening the autoimmune and associated inflammation. So first and foremost, I'd actually check out that section of your report, because even without seeing a clinician, that can really educate you as to how aggressive you need to be with the removal. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Unfortunately, gluten, especially for autoimmune conditions, tends to be a binary thing. It's not you get to reduce it with autoimmune conditions, and unfortunately, my apologies, you got to cut it completely out. So understanding your HLA and then understanding how on earth you cut out that, which is my deity, are very different things. And the moral support of a clinician is important because I don't know how I was able to do it.
Oh, God. I tried as well, this whole thing of like, well, what if it's the best sourdough organic I could possibly find? If it's not gluten free, then you're still going to have that immune system activation, especially if your HLA genes are not in your favor. That particular antibody, by the way, is very long lasting. Like, it's annoying. Like, if you have a handful of something that has some gluten in there, your body can react for 2 all the way up to 6 months from that. So I was over here when I went gluten free. I was like, yeah, like I'll just have it on the weekends. I'll just, you do all these things to try to include it. Man, you're still going to be reacting to it, and it's going to be causing that inflammation. So I recommend strongly finding alternatives to all your favorite stuff. And it's a bit of a process, but I got there eventually. I'm sure Dr. K did as well.
Mhm.
Like I found some cassava flour wraps, and I found some pasta that's made out of quinoa. And you can find gluten-free versions of stuff. But like I said earlier, molecules that look a lot like gluten, if there's a true sensitivity, can still cause that little bit because of the mirroring thing that happens on the antibodies. So gluten free, that's my recommendation. Or you can take dipeptidyl peptidase, or gluten guardian enzyme, because that will eat the gluten when you take it in, and that can reduce it a bit. But I think that it's pretty much just get rid of it. You're not going to miss it after a certain period of time, and you will feel better. So I recommend that.
Okay, so I'm very honest celiac. I still miss my croissants.
Oh, really? I found the
Oh,
cassava flour
yes.
was pretty good myself, but
I will always miss my croissants, but that's just me being honest. I
totally
don't
fair.
get them, but yeah. All right, let's
Okay.
move on.
Yes, let's move on. So Evelyn's got the next question. She's asking about spices and saying, aren't a lot of specific herbs bad for mast cell activation syndrome? Is there a list or is it individual? Um, I have an answer. This is probably a better one for you, Dr. K, but I will say quickly that anything that contains a lot of histamine can be difficult for MCAS, right? So sometimes, yeah, you have to reduce any dietary sources of
Yeah.
histamine, but I also recommend being aware of things like DAO, right? There's diamine oxidase is the enzyme that breaks down histamine. And if you measure your histamine levels and you're not looking at what that DAO looks like, you're not getting a complete picture of what these mast cells are doing. A lot of histamine, but also high DAO means you're giving an appropriate response to it. And there's a lot to be said about the HPA axis. You know, when you have a lot of cortisol and too much stress, that also kicks on those mast cells, right? For TNF alpha and interleukins as well as histamine. So it's kind of a broader picture. But yeah, I think a lot of spices do have some histamine in there. Same with leftover meats, leftover starches. So be aware. Dr. K, you have any fun
Yeah.
gems?
I no, I think I'd differ a little bit back. I think we'd address this in a different question, namely, it's important to work with a doctor. Dr. Google will have some good preliminary lists, but all of those would need to be refined in the care of a provider because not only do you, to Justin's point, you want to look at, yes, you need to reduce for a certain period of time, but you also want to look at what are we doing to solve for? How can we support so that life becomes a little bit more full again? And it's not just about these, managing histamine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts there. Yeah. All right. Um, all right. So I see something coming in from Edit, and um it sounds like Edit is talking about a lot of Edit is about 70 years old, female, and it sounds like there's been several injuries. And so I think it sounds like, at 70, how can you go about a bit of a rehab plan to kind of get back and really rehabilitate from, it sounds like a few injuries and a few surgeries. And I think that's the spirit of your question. Um, Justin, any thoughts there?
Yeah. So exercise is always going to be among the top things that I recommend for people. The manner in which you exercise, the volume that you exercise with, that's very much something that I use clinical correlation for, right? Because some people, the wear and tear on their body, they're just at a state where you don't want to do heavy impact, bombastic workouts, but you want to get that hormetic stress, right? You want to get some adaptation. You want to keep your bones strong, Lord knows. I mean, you want to make sure that sarcopenia is not a thing and keep you strong and mobile, keep your posture right. So addressing the exercise equation is a really, really big and important conversation that I have with people. I recommend starting with things that are a little bit more restorative in nature.
Mhm.
I'm a big fan of swimming. That's full body movement, right? That's fantastic. I'm a big fan of something called animal flow. That's like a fun little thing with doing various walks and different things that really help restore natural movements. Like there's
Cool.
things called horse stance where you like sit, you're standing, but you sit in such a way that it heals your hips. You can swing from the bar. I mean, you may only be able to do it for 10 seconds, but that really helps rehabilitate your shoulders. There's monkey walking, there's crab walking, there's a lot of cool stuff in animal flow. So that's a really cool thing to add in. Uh, Dr. K is stoked on animal flow. I might just get her to try it yet.
Yeah, you're not gonna have to try hard. That sounds delightful and ridiculous and perfect.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Be a kid again with your exercise. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like so many of those things that they used to make us do in gym class were
Yeah.
perfectly legitimate. You know, like how about arm circles? That's a really good exercise, right? Like you're
Mhm.
not going to build muscle with it, but you get that. It's called a controlled articular rotation, a CAR, CAR. And if you can just get all of those different ranges of motion awake and working again, you can really help rehab and restore your body. I
Mhm.
wouldn't recommend hitting heavy weights, but anything body weight, right? Calisthenics, that's a fantastic place to start. Make sure that you're just keeping your nervous system right when you approach your exercise. Paul Chek has this great concept called working in versus working out, right? And it's like working out is that catabolic thing where we're trying to trigger an adaptation by beating the body up a little bit. We want real good homeostasis and balance between that and the working in. That would be the animal flow, the yoga, going for a walk in the park, maybe some swimming, things that don't cause all that impact on your joints. So I recommend doing that. And then everything else is about rehabilitation. It's foam rolling, it's massages, it's getting good sleep. there's a lot of things that you can do for that. I mean, if you want a coaching session with me, I can go over a big old list. But
Mhm.
check out some of those things. Animal flow is a lot of fun. I've started doing it every day because of my back issues, and it's been
I
helping.
love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd encourage you to definitely reach out because I think you'd obviously want to personalize that based on the specific injuries.
Yeah.
Next in the chat, we got a lot of questions around SOD and GPX balance. So I'd really encourage you again to go into your portal or your app and go specifically into that mitochondrial antioxidants section because that will tease out for you what the rates are. Sheila did ask a question in the chat that said, would catalase, which is another enzyme that's responsible for neutralizing some of the byproduct of SOD2, namely the hydrogen peroxide, would that help balance these? The answer is yes. And we are putting out some new genes, and a SNP or a gene that speaks specific to this will be part of that. So tune in the new year to learn about how this gene is going to be helpful and further help our understanding of this profile. Yeah. All right. Susan has our next question, and they're asking around thoughts on breathing hydrogen. And Susan, I'd really encourage you to go to the webinar that we did. In essence, I think both Justin and I think it's great. It's been well read or well researched, especially in COVID and a few other conditions of that nature, and strong evidence there. But I think we talk a lot more about the nuance of what you should be aware of, especially around some of those breathing machines in that. Yeah, Justin, anything to add to that one?
No, just that I think that when we're dealing with methods of intake, we want to make sure that we have reliable sourcing on different things. It does make sense to me that anything that you breathe in becomes systemic pretty quickly. Like
Mhm.
I've made the funny analogy on here about cannabis and how it's like if you eat it, then your liver has to transform it into 11-hydroxy metabolite, and the whole process takes a while before it hits your body. Once it hits your body, it hits your body. But were you to breathe in some of it, like vaporize some of it or whatever, it takes like 5 seconds and it's systemic, right?
Mhm.
So I could see the logic with something like hydrogen that it's going to probably deliver pretty quickly. I've never tried it. Just full disclosure, it's on my list of biohacking things to try, but it's a very long list. I just use the tablets myself because they are reliable for parts per million. Each time it's the same dosage. I know what 2 is and 3 is, and it's just very easy to deal with that way. But I could see the logic there. But like Dr. K said, check out our webinars, and there's a lot of great research out there being done. It's not, that's the thing about hydrogen too, is it's kind of a burgeoning area of research.
Mhm.
So keep your finger on that pulse.
Yeah. All right. Zia is asking the question of they're interested in spinal cord injury impact and how genes can support awareness and treat not necessarily treatment, but supportive care around that. So Zia, I would highly recommend that no two spinal injuries are going to be the same. So you'd really want to talk with a practitioner. So my advice there would be get your DNA 360 done and then book a consult with us so we can understand the exact nuance of the case. Because obviously there's not going to be one gene that says, here's exactly what you do for a spinal cord injury. It's going to be that fullness of what's going on and then what supports are actually needed and how do your genes inform what are the best types of those supports.
Yeah.
Yeah. Justin, Cindy is asking if you have a brand of methylene blue or a mechanism of methylene blue, because I like this question. I think it's a very wise question. If you're taking methylene blue under the care of a provider, what's the best way to get it? Because there are a lot of snake oil dealers out there.
Oh, for sure. And any just normal like Amazon methylene blue or something like that, I don't recommend. I don't recommend getting peptides from Amazon. I love Amazon, but supplements in general, it's like, what was the temperature of the warehouse? Did the guy drop it? You know what I mean? There's too many factors there. Um, with methylene blue in particular, there is a brand called Bio Blue that I think is pretty efficacious. And it's something that is pretty well documented on their research, their website. And methylene blue, like I mentioned, is pretty versatile. And if there is something to do with your mitochondria that you want to utilize, a redox agent like that, I think, is pretty valuable.
Mhm.
Great before a walk in the sunshine or some red light therapy. It really helps with that electron transport chain as well. It boosts your serotonin up nicely. So if you have suboptimal 5-HTT LPR genes, and you want to boost that up a little bit, there are certain mechanisms within methylene blue that can help that. But that's not my official recommendation for you. I'm just waxing poetic. It's not for everybody, so be aware.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Can you speak a little bit to, so you talked about, I'm not going to be able to articulate the whole thing, but the 8-OHGG testing. Can you talk quickly, just give a little bit of a summary there? And if folks want to be doing that test, is that a blood test? How might they go about that, other than obviously seeing you?
Yeah. So 8-OHDG, that would be a urinary metabolite test, right? So it's one of the ones you pee on the card and then you let it dry and then you send it in. Um, your general practitioner, I believe, may have access to it, but there's specific labs like Fluids IQ that have something called the Metabolic Wellness Panel. And it's got a few markers on there. 8-OHDG is one of them. And then it's got urinary bile acids. I'm in love with that as well for liver congestion. And then it's also got something called indican on that same one. Indican is a marker for like protein maldigestion and absorption. So that can be a really valuable thing to look at as well. You do need to have a practitioner get that for you. So something to be aware of. And by the way, shout out to you, David. David was a patient of mine. We did a whole program together, and he's the man. So thanks for showing up tonight, David.
I love it. All right. Susan is asking, they have a slow presentation of CYP1A2 and asking if things like NAC, ALA, berberine, etc., should they be adjusting that based on a slower CYP1A2?
Gosh, all right. So NAC, ALA, those kinds of things are going to be more so for the phase 2 glutathione part of that. As far as speeding up the CYP1A2, I would actually recommend more the cruciferous vegetable route. But you need to understand what phase 2 looks like for you as well. So remember, CYP1A2 is phase 1, glutathione conjugation is phase 2, right? So we got more than one thing going on here. If that CYP1A2 is slow and all of your glutathione processes are slow, you may be in a good spot anyways, frankly. I recommend a coaching session. I know I'm a broken record here, but there's just so many considerations with these sorts of things. But at a baseline, yeah, I mean, cruciferous vegetables, sulforaphane, those kinds of things will help speed up the CYP1A2.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so I think I'm seeing a few questions in the chat. I'm going to aggregate this. A few questions in the chat that are saying, like, I have some deleted GSTs. How can I support those? And I think you actually already indirectly answered that. So what are your thoughts, Justin, when people come in with deleted GST genes?
So the main thing to consider is that what we don't want to do is overload the pathway. On paper, it would make sense, and even well-informed practitioners would likely put you on glutathione, right? They would say, "Well, you're not detoxing well. Let's give you some glutathione." Understand here that that's not necessarily the greatest approach because we don't want to overload the pathway. Glutathione can bind to other stuff if it's not able to follow its instructions. The genes are instruction manuals, so we don't want to give our body major amounts of a substrate that it doesn't have the instructions for. I would recommend in that circumstance the precursors, the N-acetylcysteine, selenium, ALA, glycine, glutamine. These things help build it up. And then pay attention to all the rest of your detox profile as well, because again, this is one segment. Antioxidation matters, vitamin D matters, vitamin C matters, and we have genes associated with all of the above.
Love it. Yeah. Susan, just kind of in tandem to this, I'll offer this briefly to the audience, is asking for an explanation between the difference of phase 1 and phase 2. So we'll quickly offer this. Think about phase 1 within the liver of essentially identifying the toxins and then tagging them for processing within the liver. The tricky part about this tagging of them in phase 1 is that it actually makes them more spiky, dangerous, oxidating within the body. Phase 2 is supposed to come and scoop them up based on this tag and be like, oh, cool, neutralize. It's that I'm actually going to go through what we think of detoxification within the liver. And then phase 3, the most important part is going to be you're going to poop, pee, or sweat those guys out. So this is why we say phase 3 is most important. If you're not doing those things on a daily basis, all the phase one and the phase two is not really going to get you anywhere else. You're quite literally, especially from the colon perspective, you quite literally reabsorb it all. So when Justin talks about phase one and phase two, it's all for none if you're not pooping and peeing and sweating. Yeah. I guess the last question I think that I would like to round us out with, other than, sorry, I guess just before I get to that, Barbara did ask a question to you specifically, Justin. Are you familiar with the panel from Dr. Wolfson?
Not particularly, but I am familiar with lipid peroxidase.
Hmm.
That marker, I would say, is valuable. That's kind of an older way of looking at it. So lipid peroxides are a way of addressing and kind of establishing if you have oxidative stress present, because it'll start to impact the lipid layers of the membranes. I think 8-OHDG is a little bit more direct of a measurement, but lipid peroxides are still reliable enough to see if there's something going on in there. So I'm not opposed to using that as a marker either.
Yeah. All right. I think the last question that we have for the evening is from Sheila, and they're asking, this is something actually we talked about. We'd say we mentioned FUT2 and we didn't. So Sheila's asking the question of how does FUT2 influence inflammation? And can we speak a little bit to that? So those that have held on to the very end, thank you for holding us accountable, Sheila. And Justin, do you want to talk about FUT2 and what different presentations, how those influence the gut and then indirectly inflammation?
Sure. Yeah. So FUT2, fucosyltransferase, I mean, we look at it in a couple of different kind of veins. On the one hand, it's a very important transporter for methylation because it really causes B12 to be secreted, or not secreted, but pulled through the lumen of the gut. And if you're not getting effective absorption of B12, it can impact methylation, and that can have a pro-inflammatory effect in and of itself. But it also directly causes the gut barrier to either absorb or not. So this is something I pair with A, the methylation conversation, and B, the GSTM1 conversation, because if you're a non-secretor of FUT2, it can impact your gut's ability to detoxify itself and keep pathogens out while allowing nutrients in. The gut lumen is necessarily thin, but it's paradoxical in its role, right?
Mhm.
So if you have suboptimal FUT2, it basically can impact your ability to absorb vitamin B12, and also can have implications on the gut barrier itself, which we want to make sure is strong to not allow pathogens and opportunistic species in. So it is another important marker, but all the methylation stuff is very important with that as well, because we need B12.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it is one of the bigger actors in terms of setting up that biome. And we know that biome is profoundly important when it comes to inflammation. It's one of the biggest game changers out there, right? Because your immune system starts in your gut in that conversation with all the little buggos. And FUT2 is very influential in that. Yeah, sir.
Whew.
There we go. Look at us. Look at us, audience. It's been so delightful to be here with you this evening. I hope that you took from these conversations a better awareness around when inflammation is a good thing, in spite of all the PR that says it's horrible, when it's not so great a thing, and then how you can leverage supplementation in terms of supporting either side of it. Yeah, Justin, I couldn't think of anyone better to have these conversations with. Your awareness of testing and your passion behind all things biohacking, but especially supplementation. I really value. I don't think I could have had this conversation with anyone else.
Oh, a lot of fun and a very important topic. We're probably going to end up doing a part two because there was still some other questions
Yeah.
we weren't able to get to. But I think we answered as many as we could, and I hope that you guys got some good value from tonight and learned a thing or two. And thanks for showing up. I mean, you're the reason why we have a webinar in the first place. And Dr. K, you're the best.